The film opens with a group of criminals led by Sig Gustafsson robbing a bank. Gustafsson breaks into a safety deposit box and takes a mysterious item called the plot device. Outside, a SWAT team arrives and surrounds the building, aiming their guns at the entrance. Suddenly, a young girl walks into the bank. Even the officers try to stop her. She enters the bank and calmly faces the robbers. She pulls off her mask and reveals that she is actually Detective Frank Draban in disguise. Still wearing a Girl Scout outfit, Draban takes down the criminals in ridiculous and over-the-top ways. Meanwhile, Sig Gustafsson escapes through a back door and hands the plot device to an older man waiting outside. Back inside the bank, after taking down all the henchmen, a woman calmly asks, "Who are you?" Draban replies, "Frank Draban, a new version." Frank is a member of the police squad, just like his late father. However, he's known for going overboard with his tactics, which has gotten the department into trouble more than once. The next day, Frank arrives at the office and his co-workers cheer for him like a hero, but Chief Davis is not impressed. She calls Frank and Captain Ed Hawken into her office. There, she firmly reminds them to follow the rules and to always keep their body cameras on. Afterwards, Frank and Ed visit a memorial to honor their fathers, as do the other detectives. Everyone except for Nordberg. Frank quietly hopes for a sign from his father. Maybe something strange and symbolic like appearing as an owl. Later, Frank and Ed are called to a crime scene where a man named Simon Davenport has driven off a cliff in what appears to be a suicide. While investigating the wreck, Frank finds a matchbook with a picture of a tiger on it. Ed points out that Simon had a sister who lives nearby and might know more. Meanwhile, the rest of the team tries to lift Simon's car using a crane that works like a giant claw machine, but the car slips out of the claw and crashes back down. Back at the station, Frank is approached by Detective Barnes, who shares new information about the earlier bank robbery. Apparently, the robbers never met each other and didn't even know who they were working for. They also didn't take any money, which leads Frank to believe they were after something else. Later, Frank meets Simon's sister, who is a singer named Beth Davenport. Beth doesn't believe her brother took his own life. She's worried that someone may have targeted him and suggests that his boss, Richard Kane, the CEO of Eden Tech, might be involved. She pleads with Frank to find out the truth. Frank agrees to stay in touch and promises to let her know if he learns anything. Later, Frank attends an event hosted by Richard Kane and his company, Eden Tech. During the event, Kane gives Frank a tour and shows off several of the company's inventions, including a machine designed to increase a man's sperm count. Later, Kane offers Frank a cigar. As he lights it, Frank notices the matchbook Kane uses. It has a tiger logo, just like the one Frank found in Simon's car. Frank mentions he's seen that type of matchbook before, and Kane casually explains that it's from a nightclub he owns called Bengal. After Frank leaves, Kane calls one of his men to send Frank a gift. The next day, the gift, a high-tech smart car, is delivered to Frank's office. Curious, Frank gets inside and starts it up. But since the car is still charging, it accidentally yanks several charging stations out of the ground and crashes through a nearby prison wall, accidentally freeing a group of inmates. Later, Frank joins Ed and Detective Barnes to interrogate one of the bank robbers. When they says he was not there at the time of robbery, they review the security footage from the bank, but most of it shows Frank eating chili dogs and then desperately searching for a bathroom, even pulling out his gun to get people to move out of his way. Eventually, they spot the robber on the footage. He admits that he was looking for a specific safety deposit box 595, the one that held the plot device. Ed then reveals that the deposit box belonged to Simon Davenport. Meanwhile, at Eden Tech, Richard Kane holds a secret meeting with a group of other evil billionaires. He explains what the plot device really is. Primordial law of toughness. It emits a special frequency that makes anyone who hears it turn violent. Kane reveals his plan called Project Inferno. The idea is for the billionaires to hide in a secret underground bunker while the rest of the world destroys itself in chaos. Once the dust settles, the survivors will be invited to join their so-called New World Order. And for entertainment in the bunker, they've booked Weird Al Yankovic. That night, Frank visits the Bengal Club to gather more information. He questions the bartender about Simon and confirms that Simon had been there recently. While at the club, Frank spots Beth and quietly asks her not to mention to Kane that she's Simon's sister. Soon after, Kane arrives. Frank casually asks to see the club's security footage, but Kane politely declines. Frank then convinces Beth to distract Kane while he sneaks off to find the footage himself. Frank slips away. He makes his way toward the security room where he runs into two guards. After a brief and chaotic fight, he manages to take them down and enters the room. Inside, Frank finds footage of Simon meeting with a reporter named Douglas O'Reilly just before his death. As Frank leaves, a siren suddenly goes off inside the Bengal club. Kane quickly orders Gustafson to keep a close eye on Frank and report any further moves he makes. Meanwhile, Chief Davis finds out about Frank's unauthorized actions at the Bengal club. Annoyed by his reckless behavior, she informs Frank that he's suspended for 2 weeks. Frank returns to his apartment where he finds Beth waiting for him. They begin to flirt and decide to have dinner together. From a nearby rooftop, Gustafson spies on them using a thermal camera. However, the heat signatures are hard to interpret, and Gustafson completely misunderstands what's happening. Every normal movement is mistaken for something inappropriate. And when Frank's dog enters the scene, Gustafson is horrified, thinking they're involving the dog in some bizarre activity. Back on the case, Frank goes to O'Reilly's apartment to continue his investigation. There, he finds obvious signs that O'Reilly has been murdered, and it looks like someone is trying to frame him. Frank finds O'Reilly's body and tries to cover up the evidence, but in the process, he accidentally cuts off the man's head with a ceiling fan. Just then, the police arrive. Frank quickly escapes in his smart car, but Kane hacks into the car system and takes control. He tells Frank that he plans to kill him by crashing the car. Frank breaks the windshield and tries to get out. As he does, he runs into a bunch of balloons and bees and then two men carrying a new windshield that somehow fits exactly. Frank finally gets help from the car's virtual assistant, Clippy, and manages to open the door and jump out just in time. Ed calls Frank to tell him that police squad is being shut down because of the investigation. The building is even being turned into a spirit Halloween store. Frank agrees to lay low and heads to Beth's house. At her place, Beth treats Frank's injury, though she oddly seasons it like a chicken wing. Frank tells her that Simon believed the plot device was being used for evil and that's likely why he was killed. He then accuses Beth of using him and faking her love. He goes off on a rant about her messing with his to accidentally deleting his saved episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Frank gets a call from one of his fellow officers telling him to come quickly. They're about to catch Sig Gustafson. Meanwhile, Gustafson is in his car when poison gas starts leaking inside. He passes out and wakes up in a hospital handcuffed to the bed. Frank arrives and tricks Gustafson into thinking that Kane has already been arrested. Believing it's over, Gustafson confesses Kane's plan to activate the plot device at midnight on New Year's Eve. But it was all a trap. Frank was in a fake hospital room. However, Barnes, who works for Internal Affairs, had another plan. She used the situation to make Frank admit he forced the confession. But Frank turns the tables and gets Barnes to admit she had been threatening contractors to get her way. Later, Frank goes to another event hosted by Kane, who is about to activate the plot device. Frank finds out the signal will be broadcast from giant New Year's balls dropping at midnight. He climbs inside one of the balls, but loses his pants, flashing the entire crowd. At the same time, Beth sneaks into the event, hoping to get revenge on Kane for Simon's death. She tries to shoot him, but the gun is empty and is caught. Kane sees Frank's embarrassing moment and frustrated decides to activate the device early before Frank can evacuate the guests. People on the streets start going wild, fighting each other as the plot device takes effect. Frank tries to stop them by throwing empty gun magazines at their faces. He then goes after Kane, but his car won't start. Suddenly, an owl that looks like Frank's father appears. The owl picks him up and flies him toward Kane. Al poops on Kane's helmet and his bike crashes. Just then, Frank is briefly replaced by actor Dave Bautista, who gives a dramatic speech to Kane while the real Frank returns and he and Kane get ready to fight. However, the fight ends quickly when Frank punches Kane in the stomach and Kane gives up. Kane tries to escape using rocket-powered gloves, but ends up crashing into a lamppost. Beth shows up, still wanting revenge, but Frank talks her out of it and convinces her to use the device to turn everyone back to normal. Kane is arrested and Frank and Beth get back together.